Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Mr. Saucedo's YouTube videos. Today we're going to be going over how to name acids, so make sure you get out a separate piece of paper and that you fill this out exactly as it is. So same columns, same order of problems, everything so that it matches. Now here's what I want you to do for these. The first three we're going to do as examples just so that you have an idea of how I actually want you to fill in this table. But we need to talk a little bit about the rules for naming acids. So remember, there are two general cases. We have certain acids that begin with hydro, and then ic acid. And then we have others that are just, sort of blank, and then ic acid. Now those are our only two rules given the fact that we have a certain number of ions that we have to memorize. So just keep that in mind if you decide to take a different class. So, we have hydroblankic acid or blankic acid. That's kind of the way that works, and we have to know the difference between the two. When do I use this? When do I use that? So, the word hydro is our big key here. Anytime you see hydro, that means that it is a simple anion that we are pairing up our H+ with, directly from the periodic table. So I have to make sure that I have my, sort of charges on the periodic table memorized in my head. Okay, if you see something that just starts with something other than hydro, that means it's going to be one of the ions that we memorized. So one of those anions that we memorized, like sulfate or phosphate or nitrate or acetate, all of those ions, if we see something starting with one of those syllables instead, then we know that we have, sort of a more complicated polyatomic ion that's going to show up as our anion. Now let's use this to our advantage and answer 1, 2, and 3. So my very first question, I have hydrochloric acid. The word hydro there is the big key. So if I see the word hydro, then I fall into this category, and that means that I have a very simple compound that has H+, so I'm going to write that down because I know that's always going to be what I start with. And then whatever I see in the middle there, that's going to be the identity of my anion. So I have chlor right here. What could chlor possibly be? Well, on the periodic table, there's only one possible anion that could be, and that is the chloride ion. And so I have to remember, what is chloride's charge? It's Cl-. So I have a +1, I have a -1. That means that they cancel each other out, and I'm left with HCl as my formula. Now we can do this, starting with crisscrossing instead. So look at number 2. I have H+ and I have N3-. So my 1 would move here, my 3 would move there. So I would have H3N, like that. Now how would I go about naming that? Remember, hydro is for simple compounds that, sort of again, I have directly from the periodic table the identity of my anion. When I use ic acid, it's one of my polyatomic ones that I have to memorize. So I have nitride. I just have an N. That is a very simple anion. And so that means I must start with hydro. Okay? So I don't know if I'm going to be able to fit this on here, but I'm going to try. So hydro is what I start with. And then I need to mention the identity of the anion. And so nitrogen is, nitro, basically. I drop the end, though, of the word. Okay, just like for hydrochloric acid, I dropped the chlorine part at the very end. So I dropped the -ene. So for nitrogen, I'm going to drop the ogen. So I get hydronitric acid. And that's the way I would write that down, hydronitric acid. Why hydro? Because N is a very simple anion. It's not one that I needed to memorize, okay, from my polyatomic ion list. Then last but not least, I have right here H3PO4. Now, I have H3PO4. PO4, that is not a simple ion. That is a polyatomic ion. So I have to remember, what is PO4 again? What is the name of that compound? Or sorry, what is the name of that anion? There we go, that polyatomic anion. So I have H3PO4. All right, so PO4, in case you forgot, PO4 is phosphate. Okay? And so remember, just like before, I drop the ending of my words here. So phosphate gets dropped. Now remember, phosphate, it doesn't sound the best just to say phosphoric acid, so instead I drop a little bit and I add a little syllable there to make it a little bit more manageable. And so I have phosphoric acid. That's the way I would write that down. Okay? And so crisscrossing that, how did I get from H3PO4 to what I needed to get? Well, H+, that's where, sort of the non-existent subscript in after the PO4 came from. But PO4 has a 3-. That's where the 3 in H3PO4 came from. And that's the way that I write the names of acids. So I have two possibilities. I have hydro something-ic acid, or I have just ic acid. I need to remember when to use those. I need to remember my charges and my polyatomic ions in order to do this. All right, and so that's it. If you have any questions, please make sure you ask tomorrow.